Jonathan, is the slides showing?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay, thanks. And hello, everyone. And apologies for not using the camera because I'm not looking at it. I'm working with a different screen. Um, I've just been reading Peter Maron's new book on rare plants, which is excellent. It's highly recommended. And it makes reference to quite a lot of botanical comings and goings. I mean, obviously, there are new plants colonizing the country naturally or unnaturally. And generally speaking, they tend to be quite rare initially. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of species on the decline for various reasons, and some are even becoming lost. So I'm going to sort of develop that theme in an orchid context. And this is really just a light-hearted romp through three themes, all of which have some relevance to events last year in 2024. So the first theme is coming soon to a bit of grassland near you, a species in the genus Serapius, which are the tongue orchids. These are pretty common in mainland Europe. It's quite a taxonomically complex group. There's a lot of potential species that could turn up. And in the past, we've had a few occurring very briefly and sporadically with big question marks over their provenance, but now things are getting serious. This is a piece of scrubby grassland on the outskirts of Tiptree in Essex, very famous in orchidological circles because in 2017, the greater tongue orchid was discovered there for the first time. And that, in the interim period, has increased in numbers. When I saw it about 3 years ago, I think there were about 60 or 70 individual plants, and now I gather that's considerably more than that. So this is an established colony, which, as far as we know, arrived naturally. Was for a time threatened by a development for housing, but I think that threat has receded. So a very exciting site, completely open, well worth visiting. In 2020, I was contacted by Geoffrey Kitchener, who's the Vice County Recorder for Kent, and he'd found a tongue orchid, or a tongue orchid had been reported at the side of a busy road near Maidstone. I went to have a look at it, and it's a specimen of the large lipped tongue orchid, Serapius vomeracea. It's hung around since then. It's been quite well visited by a number of orchid fanciers. I believe there are now, in fact, two individuals. Now, being at the side of a busy road in Kent, where the roads tend to lead to and from the continent, it's interesting to speculate what the origin of that may be, but it certainly persisted and may well continue to do so. Serapius cordillera, which is the heartflower tongue orchid. This is a very interesting one. This is a wildflower garden in the suburbs of South Sheffield, Yorkshire. You can see the plant right in the middle of the image on the left and a close-up on the right. Not too many people are aware of this or have seen it, but Sean Cole and I both visited it in 2021, and it's flowered every year since. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people saying, well, you know, Kent and Essex, maybe, yes, you could get natural colonization, but not Yorkshire. And there must be some origin for an artificial introduction of some sort. And to those people, I just say at the moment, prove it. Orchid seeds are tiny, they can disperse long distances, and this could be a natural occurrence, but we can never be sure. The final species of Serapius is small flowered tongue orchid, and this has the longest history in the UK because it flowered between 1987 and 2008 or so on the Devon-Cornwall border, clifftop grassland, in fact, in two different locations. And when I took this slide, the image on the left, you can see two patches of gorse in the foreground and maybe some wire mesh cages close to them, which are protecting the plants from potential predation by deer or rabbits or whatever. This was, I think, the last penultimate year. The plant disappeared in 2008 and was never seen again in this locality. But it wasn't the last we've seen of small flowered tongue orchid, because this is the Nomura building. It's the headquarters of a Japanese bank, and it's at the side of the River Thames in the City of London, very close to St. Paul's Cathedral. and it's famously the site for a colony of small flowered tongue orchid, which grows on its roof garden. It's 12 stories high. It's very difficult to get permission to go and visit that, but Fred Rumsey, Richard Bateman, and I, and a few others managed to do that last year. You go into the building, you sign yourself in, you're taken up to the 11th floor in a very plush lift. And then the last step is to go up a rickety staircase and through a trapdoor, which you can see on the right here. And you emerge into this floristically amazingly diverse roof garden with terrific views over the Thames and St. Paul's Cathedral, etc. A huge variety of species, most of which I think have colonized naturally, including a colony of the small flower tongue orchid, which has been around for quite a few years. And over that period, it's increased substantially in numbers, such that last year, I think we were talking between 500 and 600 individual plants. It's an incredible sight. It's a pity it's so difficult to get up and see, but one tip for people wanting to see this plant might be to hang around the flower beds and any waste ground around the base of the building, because the seed may well be dispersing and the plants could establish down there. So that's Serapius. I've got, and that's another group of plants on the roof garden. I'll move on now to the ghost orchid, which is a species a lot of people will have heard of, arguably Britain's rarest vascular plant. It loves shaded beechwoods and oak woods, and it had a golden period in the 1960s to the mid-1980s when it was fairly reliably flowering in a couple of woods in the Chilterns, one in Oxfordshire, one in Buckinghamshire. And in 2006, I was lucky enough to see one of the plants in the Buckinghamshire site. This is it with a close-up of the flower. The flower actually looks as though it might be upside down, but in fact it's the right way up. It's other orchid flowers that's the wrong way around. This was 1968. There was a plant appeared in this was 1986, beg your pardon. A plant appeared in 1987, and then there was nothing reported at all for many years. Not at this particular site. And there wasn't actually a report of ghost orchid anywhere in Britain for a number of years, such that the ghost orchid was sort of declared extinct in Britain in 2005, and then Plant Life, well-meaningly, in 2009 issued what they called the Ghost Orchid Declaration, which was a plea to prevent further extinctions like the ghost orchid. And of course, guess what happened then, 2 months later? Ghost orchid flowered. It flowered not in the Chilterns this time, it flowered in Herefordshire, Hoare Woods, just a single individual, a very puny one. And it was seen, I think, by just 5 people, including Tim Rich, who kindly provided this photo. Of course, Hoare Woods has been searched extensively since that occurrence, but no further ghost orchids have been found there. So we now fast forward to 2024, when there was an astonishing discovery, which has received a lot of coverage, even in the national press, of a ghost orchid in a location in Buckinghamshire by Richard Bate, who is a dental surgeon. And you can see probably just about in the middle of this picture, a ghost orchid. It's pretty difficult to make out, and it's stunning that he was able to find this, because he wasn't necessarily looking for ghost orchid. He was looking, I think, for helleborine orchids. And if we zoom in a bit, that is the plant that caused all the excitement in 2024. So if we just summarize there, we had plants in the 1980s. There was a gap of 22 years until one flowered in Hereford in 2009 and was seen by 5 people. And then a gap of 15 years to 2024, when this plant was found by Richard Bate. And unfortunately, after he'd seen it, it disappeared from sight. It was probably predated by a slug or deer or something. And so he was the only individual who actually saw that plant. So it's fortunate he did take these photos at the time of discovery. So we now have a gap of just about 40 years when only 6 people have seen a ghost orchid, a live ghost orchid in the UK. There's a whole generation, at least one generation of botanists who have never seen it and possibly may never will, but I hope they do. We'll just have to see. So finally, the third theme is the march of the lizard orchid. Very different to the ghost orchid in appearance. This is our most stately orchid, I would say, and it might even be the most stately vascular plant in the country. It's well known to people because it has established colonies in Sandwich Bay in Kent, in Camber Bay in Sussex, the Devil's Dyke in Cambridgeshire, and there's a site on the dunes in Somerset. So it's easy to see. But what we've been finding recently is an increasing occurrence of plants in locations where it's never been seen before, as a consequence of seed coming from those established sites or from the continent. And in Hertfordshire, which is the county I'm a co-recorder for, we haven't had, until recently, we hadn't had lizard orchid since 1931, when there was a rather enigmatic occurrence of a plant that disappeared immediately because it was dug up and put in a garden. In 2020, I was contacted by a gentleman who's a retired veterinarian who lives in the east of the county, and he'd got a lizard orchid on his lawn, which had appeared completely spontaneously. So I headed over there, confirmed the identity, took these photos, and yes, it was the first lizard orchid in Hertfordshire for something like 100 years, not far off 100 years. I'll come back to this site at the end, but we then move forward to 2021 to a site near St Albans, which is incredibly diverse botanically, again, potentially destined for development. But this young lad, Casper, who was 8 years old at the time, was out for a walk with his dad in this area. He wandered off. He came back and told his dad he'd found a strange plant. Dad went over to look. He saw it was something very, very unusual. He contacted the Wildlife Trust, and the Wildlife Trust contacted me. And yes, it's confirmed as a lizard orchid, a really, really nice specimen, which has flowered every year since. It was particularly good last year, but just the one plant again. And then we've had a single plant turn up on an industrial estate in Letchworth near the Xerox office, which is a pretty difficult one to conserve, but it's very close to the tree, so that helps to keep it from the ravages of the council. And on the right here, we have a really nice one that turned up on calcareous turf, which has resulted from the deposition of spoil from building the Baldock bypass. So, and there are others. So quite a few instances over the last 5 years, but all just as single individuals, raising the question of whether such occurrences can eventually result in colonies. And conventional wisdom would say that lizard orchids are cross-pollinated by insects, so a single plant could well be just a dead end. But of course, there is also the potential for an insect moving up or down the flowering spike to transfer pollen from one flower to another and result in a ripe seed capsule. And I'm delighted to say that does seem to be what's happened in at least one case. So if we go back to the garden where the plant was found in 2020, that plant has continued to be present every year. But last year, the owner rang me up and he said, well, I've got good news for you. He said, the plant is flowered again and I've got 14 others on the lawn and lots of barren rosettes. So Richard Bateman and I raced over, not surprisingly. And yes, we can confirm that we have now an established colony on that lawn, which could well increase in size considerably even further, which is going to make mowing the lawn very difficult. But yes, you can have a colony resulting from the establishment of a single individual. And since there are a number of England recorders, I think, tuned into this webinar, it would be really fascinating to hear the experience of others in terms of, first of all, the occurrence of the lizard orchid in new sites, which I know has been taking place in a number of locations, but also whether there's any evidence elsewhere of colonies resulting from that occurrence. These are others at that same site. This is the colony that we now have. And any comments or questions, I'll be delighted to receive by email, because I know there's no time at the moment to have a Q&A session. But yeah, thanks for your attention. Back to you, Jonathan.
Um, and yes, the orchid's been spreading in Cambridgeshire as well, and it's no longer even a scarce species in the county because it's been found in more than 16 monads. So it's doing quite well, but I don't know of any colonies as such yet, apart from the one on the Devil's Dyke. There's a comment in the chat from UK Had Limited, so I'm not quite sure exactly who that is. And he says that the increase in sporadic appearances has coincided with the rapid rise of the Camber. I guess that might be Cambridge and Newmarket populations. I would guess that the vast proportion of the long existing Sandwich population ended up in the North Sea. P.S. There's now a colony in Salisbury where I now live. Um, Pete Carey says after 5 years being absent, he's going to keep an eye on the um, close eye on the species. Oh, in Camber Sands rather than Cambridge. So that's what's in the chat. Okay. I don't think there's anything in Q&A. There's nothing else in the chat. So thank you very much, Ian. And if people do have any orchid queries, do take pictures for Ian. I think you need to take a range of angles for good identification and ideally a scale bar as well. So that's a point to bear in mind. So I think our plan is now to have a short break so you can have a quick cup of tea or visit the facilities. And we originally said it'd be a 15-minute break. So shall we rejoin at 3:20? And then I'll welcome Astrid Biddle to give her talk, and then we'll finish up with me. So a break now until 3:20, and we'll rejoin again then. So we're now going to hear from Astrid Biddle, who's I think you're now a consultant ecologist in one sense, but I see Astrid more frequently at biological meetings than I do at botanical meetings. Yeah. And she is very adept at taking beautiful